All right, welcome. Today, we are diving into a legal statement so strange, it sounds like it has to be a joke. It connects one of the most famous cartoon characters in the world with the ancient, serious laws of the high seas. So buckle up because we're about to solve a really fascinating legal puzzle. Here it is. This is the sentence that started this whole thing. And yeah, it's a real quote from a real legal commentary. At first glance, you just gotta laugh, right? But it's not a punchline. What it actually is a clue. It points to this massive invisible gap between our everyday ideas of how things work and the super specialized world of maritime law. So that's the big question for us today. What on earth could that possibly mean? What happens when Springfield's #1 troublemaker wanders into a courtroom governed by centuries of maritime tradition? Let's figure it out. Okay, to crack this little mystery, we have to break that sentence down into its two completely different parts. And first up, we're going to start with the one we all know. Before we can really get why this defense is so useless out at sea, we need to get on the same page about what it even is. What does it actually mean to use the Bart Simpson defense? Yeah, this is pretty much every kid's playbook, right? The idea is so simple. Just deny, deny, deny. If nobody saw you do it, then they can't prove a thing. It's all about just saying, nope, wasn't me, and forcing the other person to do all the work to prove otherwise. We've all seen it. And hey, maybe we've all even tried it a few times. All right, so we've got Bart's playground logic down. Now let's talk about the other half of that weird sentence, Admiralty. It's time to leave the world of cartoons behind and dive into a legal world with a completely different set of rules. So Admiralty law, which you'll also hear called maritime law, is basically its own legal universe. Seriously, it's one of the oldest kinds of law on the planet, and it evolved over centuries specifically to handle the unique, messy problems that can only happen out at sea. We're talking everything from shipping contracts to arguments between sailors to, yes, collisions in the middle of a foggy ocean. And this part is absolutely crucial. See, the rules that work on land just completely fall apart when you're miles from shore. Evidence can literally sink to the bottom of the ocean. Your only witnesses might be on another ship sailing to the other side of the world. And a lot of times these things happen in the legal gray area of international waters. To deal with all that chaos, Admiralty law had to come up with its own way of thinking, its own logic. Okay, so we've got our two pieces of the puzzle. We have the Bart Simpson defense over here, and we have the ancient, complicated law of the sea over there. Now it's time to bring them together and see exactly why these two things just cannot exist in the same room. This is the real heart of it. Why isn't just shouting, "I didn't do it," good enough when your ship just ran into another one? Well, the answer is that these two ways of thinking start from completely opposite places. And this slide right here, this is where it all clicks. Look at the left side. Bart's whole world is based on him being 100% innocent until someone proves him 100% guilty. But now look at the right side. In Admiralty law, the game is totally different. For instance, in a collision, the court might start by presuming that both ships share some of the fault. The burden of proof can actually shift back and forth. If one captain shows evidence, the other captain then has to prove they weren't being negligent. It's not about your word against mine. And it's almost never about one person being completely right and the other completely wrong. In fact, sometimes the ship itself can be held liable. It's a system built for a messy, complicated reality, where "nobody saw me do it" is just a totally meaningless thing to say. So you see, the entire framework of maritime law is built from the ground up to handle situations where a simple "I didn't do it" just doesn't cut it. It's a system that gets the shared risks and the unique challenges of being on the open ocean. Bart's logic just, well, it sinks without a trace here. Now, this might all seem like a really fun, kind of weird piece of legal trivia, and it is, but it also points to something much, much bigger about how rules and logic actually work in the real world. Yeah, this strange little phrase isn't just a fun fact to share. It's like a little window that lets us peek into the very nature of law itself and see how it's constantly changing and adapting to the world around it. So, what are the big ideas to take away from all this? Well, first, there's no such thing as one single thing called the law. It's actually a huge collection of different specialized systems. You've got tax law, patent law, and, yeah, Admiralty law. And each one has its own special logic. Second, what we might think of as common sense on the playground, well, that same logic can be completely wrong inside one of these specialized fields. And finally, maybe most importantly, context is everything. The rules of the sea were made for the sea, just like the rules of the playground were made for the playground. And that leaves us with one last thing to think about.
The Bart Simpson defense completely falls apart out on the ocean. So it kind of makes you wonder, right? What other simple, common sense ideas that we all just take for granted would completely break down if we just put them in a different context? It's a fascinating question and a great reminder that the world is always a little more complex and a lot more interesting than it first seems.